Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. We're excited to present today's panel discussion on maximizing efficiency and impact in physical security. Before we get into the broadcast, let's quickly cover some logistics. If you get disconnected, please rejoin using the same link you used to log in originally. Your microphone is muted, but you can submit questions at any time using the Q&A button as part of your display. And when you do submit questions, we won't attribute any questions or comments you make as an individual. We just want to facilitate candid questions and feedback as part of today's discussion. My name is Andrew Saluk, and I'm your moderator for today's discussion. This webinar is presented by Topo AI. We provide a cloud-first threat intelligence platform that empowers security teams across all industries to respond faster to risks and threat events. And we do this by digesting intelligence and asset information from any content source into one platform. This allows you to locate and respond to threats that might impact your assets, and we call our product Topo One Software. And now, allow me to please introduce our panelists. I'm happy to introduce Sarah Slinker, an intelligence industry veteran and the Director of Enterprise Safety and Security for Gartner. Thank you for joining us, Sarah.
Thank you.
And then today we also have Rob Gummer, who served in intelligence and supervisory roles in the US Army and also the FBI. And he is now the Director of Intelligence Operations at the NFL. And we're very glad to have you here, Rob.
Thanks, Andrew. Glad to be here.
Thank you, sir. So here we're looking at today's discussion topics. We're also going to leave time for audience questions. And we've received several from audience members prior to the broadcast. We'll answer as many as we can. And so we have a variety of industries represented on today's call, and it seemed that we also had attendees who are at different stages of their careers. I'm curious to learn about what sort of activities our audience members are focused on right now in their organizations. So let's start with a quick polling question. So you can see it on your screen right now. Are you currently focused on any of the following security program activities? And please select any that apply. So if maybe you're focused on creating an intelligence program, maybe you've had an intelligence program and you're trying to put your feeds into one place. Maybe you're collaborating with teams outside of the security department to mitigate risks. Maybe you're adding new or specific programs like workplace violence or travel risk management. Maybe you've had a program running for a while and so now you're trying to improve your existing processes. Perhaps you're establishing a GSOC or a VSOC, or maybe you're establishing a fusion center. We'll give everyone a moment to reply and then get back into the broadcast. Thanks everyone for participating. And just if you hear some music in the background, it's because an ice cream truck has decided to drive by right now. So let's go ahead and get into hopefully you can all see the results on your screen right now. As we noted, we've got a pretty diverse audience here, but by far the most common activity that the audience is focused on right now is adding new programs, travel risk, workplace violence, etc. It looks like about two-thirds of you are doing that right now. So thank you very much for sharing. So now let's get into the discussion. So let's say a security leader is new to the organization. And I'd love to hear our panelists' advice on what are the first physical security programs, initiatives, or activities that someone in this situation should examine or pursue. And Sarah, could you please take the lead on this?
Sure. So I think there's a difference between being a new person at an organization and having a new security function at an organization. You could have both. So, if you're coming into an existing program, how you will approach it will be very, very different. You'll want to get to know the program, the people, and then move forward with your own type of gap analysis and kind of realign and recalibrate the program to what you think the new vision of the program will bring. If the program is new at your company, you'll start in a much different place because you could be on your own. You may only have one other person. And your job in the beginning will really just be get to know the company you work for and its footprint, what it does, how it interacts with each other, how the executive level interacts with each other, the expectations, And from there, then you can start doing your gap analysis and really understanding what's been keeping them up at night, and really what brought security to the table in the first place.
Thank you, Sarah. And that echoes with something I've heard other security leaders mention. Sometimes there's some type of compelling event that usually depends on what type of industry they're focused on. And Rob, I'm just curious how this squares up with your experience.
Hey, Andrew, I think it completely aligns with it. In all honesty, I've experienced kind of both simultaneously, if that makes sense. Where, I was tasked with creating a brand new GSOC in a department which already had security, but with different functions like intelligence, which didn't exist in the league before. So there wasn't necessarily SOPs to refer to or built-in processes for how that intelligence program would work. But there was a lot of resources for what was built before inside that security program, to include understanding some of the relationships they have with other business units, understanding some of the emergency plans, business continuity plans. What are some of the other assets that group has? What's some of their outward relationships, say with local law enforcement, other security departments and other organizations? And I would say the last but not least is really get an understanding of your peers, what their lines of effort are. How does your job and task intersect those lines of efforts? And if there's things in which you can build some natural redundancies, or identify some things that are duplicative, and I think all that kind of rolls into your overall gap analysis once you understand that architecture.
I appreciate sharing that. I appreciate you saying that, Rob, and sharing your experience. And so you both touched on this notion of relationships. And so we've got relationships between executives and business units. You've got relationships with your peers. You've got relationships potentially with local law enforcement. And so when you think about any successful security program, one key element there is the people who are actually responsible for implementing it. And I'd like to get the panelists' thoughts on how you think about the hiring process, maybe what type of people you try to select, especially given the importance of relationships, and just how you think about the personnel you select in relation to other decisions that you might, such as technology. And I'm wondering if Rob could take the lead on that one.
Oh, thanks, Andrew. So I definitely, this was something I experienced in real time. I had to build a team from scratch to start staffing the GSOC on the intelligence side. A couple of things play, I think, a major role. The way I kind of look at it, those staff members are the heartbeat of your operation. Everything else you kind of build around that. So when I look at potential candidates, I look at they have multiple experiences, sometimes being in crisis level events, their level of motivation, their proficiency, not necessarily being hyper proficient in like a singular tool, but being proficient in a variety of different things. I guess the best way to put it in a tangible form, you kind of want Swiss Army knife sometimes. And I like getting varying degrees of experience. That way you kind of remove some of those inherent biases that might have, so with my team in particular, half of my team are experienced analysts who've been in the EIC, done a variety of different jobs, but even the jobs that they've done are all different. So they come in with different experiences, different optics. But then the other half of the team are younger junior analysts, again, just because they're junior doesn't mean that they're not capable or effective. They have different areas of expertise. They have different things that they're really good at, and really, seeing what that collective looks like and building around there. So that further informs the tools and technology, recognizing that those tools and technologies can't replace that staff or the proficiencies that those guys have inherent into them. And it also gives you a baseline on how innovative that group can be, and what I think at a maximum or a minimum, they need to be successful.
Rob, I appreciate you sharing that. And just to ask a quick follow-up there. So we see a lot of times there's people who have served in law enforcement or in the military, and they're contemplating a transition to corporate security or to the private sector in general. you mentioned that people's innovation, their creativity, their ability to solve problems, that in some cases might be more highly prioritized than, say, skill with a particular tool. Are there any tools that you would recommend to people in the audience where you should definitely gain some proficiency in this, or at least understand how it works?
No, I think most of the security business right now, at a bare minimum, have some type of open source, monitoring platforms. This so they can understand risk out there. Many are adopting VCC platforms, so getting at least an understanding what that landscape is out there. Geospatial background or understanding of mapping is very helpful. I say a basic level of be able to do Excel and do some level of analysis through that. We deal a lot with big data and big volumes of data. Even just understanding what kind of platforms are out there that folks use to investigate cases or anything that really makes you understand a security universe. I would challenge anyone to dive in, and it's a continual education. It never stops because the landscape's always changing, and you really have to stay dialed in and understand what's kind of on the horizon and what's kind of hot right now and why it's hot. There's a lot of tools and technology and platforms that are out there, so much so that can be intimidating. You really got to look back on, I have these skill sets. What's out there that augments my skill sets? What are some areas that I don't understand that I probably need to? And really rely on peers that they have out there who are in that space to identify things that are kind of commonalities and, hey, you really should look in this direction and get an understanding of this. It doesn't have to be like a Where's Waldo or a Seek and Find or something. There's enough peers out there in the community for you to really lean on and get that insight and get some really good directions.
Thank you, Rob. And I also wanted to get Sarah's perspective on the hiring process, maybe what type of skills you're looking for, and perhaps how hiring decisions may relate to other types of decisions you have to make as a leader.
Sure. So I perfectly agree with everything that Rob said, that, who you hire, when you hire, and what skills you're looking for completely depend on the threats of your company and how your company operates. So if you're in manufacturing and supply chain, you're gonna look for somebody that's very tactical with those types of technologies and that type of knowledge. If you do minimal travel, maybe you don't need somebody that's high up in travel security. But overall, what I always try to look for is a good mix of doers and thinkers. So you can't have too many strategic thinkers, or you won't have somebody that's hands up, sleeves up, hands on, getting things done, and you can't have a team that's all full of doers and nobody's looking ahead. I think you hit the sweet spot when you find people that are interested in doing both or have the background to do both, and they're willing to try something new. So you can have somebody who's been a geopolitical analyst for years, and you're going to put them on a different task that's maybe workplace violence or something else that's a little bit outside of their comfort zone. And that's really what I look for, is somebody that can fill a niche around an expertise, but is also willing to go outside of that niche and take what they know and apply it elsewhere.
I appreciate you sharing that, Sarah. And a little bit later, I'd love to hear some stories from both of you about things that maybe people on your team have done that impress you with respect to creativity or getting outside the comfort zone. Before we get into that topic, I wanted to touch back on what Rob had mentioned with respect to some of the technology out there. And so you both presumably been in situations where you don't have unlimited budgets, where you might have to do more with somewhat modest resources, or at least resources a little bit short of what you ideally would have. And so I'd love to get your insights on how you prioritize spend, and to connect to a concept Rob mentioned earlier, how do you build redundancy into your plans to make sure that you don't lose something due to a smaller budget one year? And I'm wondering if Sarah could take the lead on this question, please.
There's a lot in that question, and everybody's got a budget and everybody has to work to the budget. I think you have to prioritize some of your technologies and your resources, because resources are not always technology. Sometimes they're people, sometimes they're consulting, around what your critical issues are. So when I go out and I look for a technology, I try not to look for something that's only going to solve one problem, but what else can it solve? And how can I apply that elsewhere, and what can I gain from it? And in addition, not only just looking for a technology, but looking for a partner behind that technology that's willing to help you think things through, that's willing to help you learn about that technology to the point that you're using it for things that you may not even thought about, and that, you know, they're going out of their way to make sure that you're using it to its fullest extent. You know, I think of it kind of like your credit card. When you go through the paperwork and you finally realize you get all these benefits, you know, behind your credit card that you would never think to use. And I think a lot of our technology vendors are the same way. You may buy a product thinking it's only going to do one thing, but if you really take the time to sit down with the vendor side by side, you'll learn that it does a lot more. So you're maximizing the value you get out of that spend. And then maybe if that piece of technology, and technology doesn't solve every problem, but it solves enough, you can start spending money on what I like to consider our people resources, because technology will only think for you so much. It's the people that you hire to run the technology that really make a difference to me. I think we lost you, Andrew. I think we may have lost Andrew, but Robert, do you want to?
Sure, I'll go ahead and jump in, you know, and I really appreciate your point, Sarah, you know, because I think you highlighted, you know, some of the critical portions of this. You know, for me, when I look at it, you know, we recently had a resource review, and like the first thing was like, wow, I have a great team, you know, so if I have to cut spend somewhere, the last thing I want to do is cut members of the team that I have. You know, why? Because they're effective, they're innovative, you know, they're very good. From there, I kind of triage outside of that and think like, okay, what's my charter? You know, like what is the thing that they have an expectation for my team to be able to do? You know, and look at the capabilities, look at the spend, and really, you know, ask my staff and myself, like, okay, you know, what are some things that we need to be able to achieve and do? What are some things that are nice for us to be able to do? And, you know, there's a lot of whiz-bang stuff that looks really cool, you know, when someone's coming in for a tour or whatever of your facility, but it might not be the thing that requires you, that makes you effective. And, you know, if you have to, you know, cut slings somewhere, it might be the first thing you cut, like, okay, I can live without that. You know, I need, you know, the staff, and I need them to be able to do investigative functions. I need them to have situational awareness of what's going on. You know, does what I have in house get me there? And can we be effective no matter what's going on with that? You know, and then everything else is kind of cascades from there. And I think the thing I try to encourage most is to have the staff think beyond the tools and really come up with innovative solutions that might not cost money. You know, ideas are free for the most part, you know, and, you know, you can get a lot of gold off of like really low tech solutions that's using the ingenuity of your team members and allow them to think through a problem collaboratively, you know, and coming out the other end, you know, and seeing like, okay, we came with a solution, do we still have a gap? You know, and like for us, and I think for, you know, many business leaders, it's a continual process that never ends.
Rob, thank you for sharing that, and my apologies to the audience. I briefly lost internet connection. I'm back. I missed the insightful points that Rob just made, but let me open it up to Sarah. Did Rob say anything where you would like to comment or expand?
No, the only thing I can think of is you kind of around the redundancies, and we always challenge our team to think about, if this technology went down, what do we do to keep this process going? So, you know, you have to look for those redundancies. And, you know, an example is if your travel risk management provider goes down for some reason, how else are you getting the data that you need to know where people are and what's going on? If your badging system goes down, how do you scale up your guarding services to make sure that, you know, you're meeting the mandate of protecting that building when the technology fails. So, you know, Rob and I kind of will go back to the same thing, that technology doesn't solve everything. You have to have really smart people behind the technology or even in front of the technology to understand its limitations and what its failure points are.
Thank you, Sarah. And since we both, so we were fortunate today that both of you have a deep background in intelligence, maybe coming at it from different perspectives or, you know, slightly different experiences. So I'm wondering if you could share with the audience how you see the intelligence function relative to other security programs and maybe relative to the organization as well. And Rob, I'm wondering if you could please share your thoughts.
Oh, well, thanks, Andrew. It's a very good question. I think it's a natural marriage. You know, if you take 2020 for being what it was, a lot of things happened in a small amount of time, you know, and there is things happening both domestically and globally and coming at a rapid fire pitch. You know, for Intel professionals, that's what we do. You get trained to analyze big volumes of data, you know, identify trend lines, do forecasting, to have a deep understanding of different threats that are out there. Things that traditional, I think, security groups don't really take the time to really do that or have the expertise to do that kind of thing. You know, a lot of security, you know, groups end up being more on the reactive side. I know when we brought in the intelligence function here at the league, you know, the chief security officer's vision was to move beyond being reactive to threats, because at that point, something's already occurred. And having the eyes out to proactively look at what the next security vulnerabilities and risks could be, you know, that's where the Intel function gets the most value. And what I've learned is that it's not just inside a security component that value comes in, but all the different business units, you know, have that same need. They're all taking risks, and some of them security risks, on a regular basis when they're thinking about, for us, you know, where we're planning our events, who we're incorporating to those events, you know, what is going on in that city, you know, do they have issues in which there's a lot of civil unrest? What's the impact, you know, and those are some of the gaps that we can answer in advance early on in the planning cycle that lowers that risk profile, that risk footprint, no matter what we're doing. So one of the things we're trying to do now is like, think deliberately, how do you incorporate intelligence in everything that we do in order to lower that risk on a regular basis?
That makes a lot of sense. And I liked your phrase there, natural marriage. And Sarah, I'm wondering how this relates to your experience, or maybe how your experience may be different.
Sure. So Intel is also in my background. And I think one of the things that surprised most people is that it's not just geopolitical. So if you're new to a company or your company is new to the security and function, you tell them about your Intel program that you want to build, and they automatically think that you're there to tell them about geopolitics, and you're not. You're really the research and analytic arm of the company if you don't already have one. And that's where I think the security industry shines, is that we do more sharing of information non-competitively than I think any other industry out there. I will tell you, I've been sat on, as we all have, hundreds of meetings in the last year, and everybody seems to turn to the security team and says, what are other companies doing about this? Even if it's an HR question, if it's a legal question, if it's a health and safety question, they're coming to the security people because we're the ones with the eyes and the ears. If you want to know about your company or a company, go ask the Intel analysts, because they're the ones who ultimately answer the questions that get managed up to the executive level. And you know, I can't be any more impressed with the analytical pool that is out there right now, supporting, you know, the public sector and the private sector. And really, they're the eyes and the ears for all of us.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm wondering, maybe not from your current role, but are you able to share over your whole career any of the, say, less security oriented questions that have been brought to you or to Intel analysts, you know?
Well, you can name it, anywhere from somebody wants to send their son or daughter on a gap year, and what can you tell me about this, to, you know, even just travel medical questions. You know, you would be surprised, and I'm sure everybody's seeing it during COVID, how often we get pinged, for travel medical questions, and none of us are doctors or nurses, obviously, for the most part, but just having the ability to find the answer. You may not know the answer, but the intel analysis is all about finding the answer and finding the right people, and that's where that networking comes in. And right now we get a lot of questions around what are other companies doing, and again, they're really not security questions. They could be HR, they could be legal, but you have an intel analyst team because they're smart and they're willing to do the research and they know the right places to go for the information.
Thank you, Sarah. So when we began the broadcast, we talked about what are the first steps you might take. And one of those first steps was understanding the relationship dynamics between executives, between different business units, et cetera. And so on this broader topic of efficiency, it seems that time plays a key role, and how you use time at different stages of your leadership role could have pretty significant impacts on success of your programs, readiness for certain types of threats, et cetera. And so I'm wondering if you two are able to share, when you think about how you might use time during a given year, or how you might use, we'll just call it downtime, say in the case of a global pandemic, I'm wondering how much time you allocate towards different types of physical security initiatives. And Sarah, I know you've seen a lot of examples across your career from different organizations. How do you think about using time effectively for physical security?
I was started at the most basic, and that is with my team. And I help my team figure out exactly what their role is. And then we try to figure out how much time they should take for each of those tasks that they do on an ongoing basis. And then I also like to make sure that everybody's got baked in time for things that may go outside of what we're already being asked to do, because the security team, again, is generally the group I have found that the company will come to when they don't know exactly who's responsible for something, and maybe we can start that conversation. I also like to make sure that we find a nice balance between having time for innovation, but also making sure that we're spending enough time on the day-to-day. So I find that a lot of security directors or just anybody new in their function feels like they're not doing their job if they're not constantly creating something new or building something new. And what that often does is that then they fail to manage what they've already built. So you think about a little kid at Christmas ripping open all of their Christmas gifts rather than kind of going one by one. I like to take a little bit of a different approach where we will innovate to as much as appropriate and needed. But my mandate is that I won't break what I've already built. And that if we take a look back and we decide that something is no longer needed, we'll make that strategic decision. But to your question about downtime, I don't think anybody knows exactly what that is, but I'll give you two examples of what we've done with the downtime. So we ramped up our travel security program, and I would say we've ramped up the reformatting and reintroduction of the travel security program, which sounds like a silly thing to do when nobody is traveling, but now was the time to do it. So the train has kind of come to a halt a little bit, and now we can build out the program we've been trying to build out while the train was moving at 100 miles an hour. And I think that has been done in our favor. The second initiative that we've done during this downtime is we looked at all of our security technologies and trying to figure out how to move them to cloud-based technologies that support the company on an enterprise level rather than a regional or site level. So badging and visitor management service are two things that we've taken advantage of this downtime in reinvigorating.
Thank you, Sarah. And just to make sure I understand one of your points there, one of the key drivers of migration to the cloud is being able to provide that enterprise service. That's so right. You're not relying on a local server. Okay.
So we're creating global programs, not centralized programs or site-specific programs.
Okay, thank you. And Rob, how about you? I know downtime may not be a word in your vocabulary either, but how do you think about allocating time to different physical security programs?
So What was interesting about 2020, was kind of the growth of the ask for the GSOCs, and a lot of that was, much like the Justice League, they expect you to save the world every day and actually know every single thing that's going on across the globe and everything at your facility and any threats to any personnel and, a host of other things. And, throughout the year, we had to do a couple of things to keep ourselves on track. One, host a couple of touch points, with both your team and then with the larger group to really work through like what we're trying to do and really like make it an understanding at large because, sometimes things just move really fast and you don't realize how much water you're taking on and how much stuff that you're doing just because you're in a response mode, you're just trying to get all of that work done. And you don't necessarily know if what you're doing is repeatable or sustainable, or even the burn it has on your employees. So those touch points allow us to do that. But then what we establish is kind of a quarterly after action review, and then a full on after action review at the end of what we would consider our season, which is right now. And at that point, it's really assessing everything that happened over both the league season, as people know it, but anything that we did during our previous off season, using that after action review to do a hard look at our processes, things that we've taken on, if there's a time now that we need to make a play for resources and what does that look like. Also seeing if there's things that we're doing that are unnecessary or duplicative. One of the things that we learned was that there are a couple of things that we pulled in to the GSOC that aren't really sustainable security functions, and there's times at which we absorb things for other business units just because they weren't necessarily well postured at the time to do it. But now, with things calming down, now it's probably a natural time for us to be able to hand that off and, weigh that against other initiatives like what Sarah mentioned is something we're doing as well, trying to streamline our visitor management, streamline our camera systems, better funnel those things, into our security operations, and then do workflows and processes with that. Well, with that is an additional ask for our resources that we're kind of already leveraging in a bunch of different ways, so now that aligns with our ask for resources, because we demonstrated what we're capable of doing. We know what the vision is and what we're trying to do, but we also recognize our limits and recognizing that if you continue to pile stuff on into those same resources, you're going to run your talent away, and all those cool tools you have, it won't mean anything because you won't have the folks behind her to do that. And I think times of crisis definitely forces into doing that, I think, in a more rapid fashion. But I think there's a definitely a more deliberate, either a formalized process that I think many leaders out there are doing, or informal processes in which you're really thinking like, hey, what's going on? And I would say the budget cycle helps too. Like right around this time of year is our budget cycle, and we really have to look at what we're spending on what, and you get questions on what you're spending on what, and a lot of those things, if you do it right, can align it with each other, and you use your off time as a time to reset and get yourself on track.
Thank you, Rob. And just to ask a follow-up that I also would like to address to Sarah, you mentioned that now you're in the stage of your budget cycle. You are getting asked, what are you using? Do we need to pay for this? Probably some form of that question. I'm wondering what types of rationale or data or other information do you use to advocate to keep the resources you have and maybe to get additional resources?
Is that for me?
You can start, Sarah, and then we'll go back to Rob. Sure.
So, part of it is a little bit anecdotal and part of it is evidence-based. So anecdotal from my team is, yes, I cannot live without this, and I will tell you why. Anecdotal from evidence-based, really looking at the data that we get out of something and how we apply that outside of our team. So there are certainly things that we pay for that are just for the team and the benefit of the team, even though they serve greater purpose. And then there are technologies and services and resources that we pay for that may not support my team immediately, but they support something we do for somebody else. So we prioritize it a little bit around that. And then we prioritize it around our usage of those technologies or those services. Do we think we're getting the most out of this? And is there somebody else in our pool that can do this for us, even though they're already doing something else? So, it's a little bit of a chess game and a little bit of a shell game, and nobody ever wants to hear that when they're talking about their budget, but you have to be really realistic about what it's there for. And just always have your lines in the sand of, these are things I will not give up. And I have rarely gotten pushback when it comes to something you cannot give up, as long as it serves a greater purpose than, just my team or something else, and then you can apply it elsewhere. So you should always be thinking about everything that you pay for and where it fits in, and how it serves different purposes, and keep that list prioritized at all times. And that's really how we do it on a quarterly basis, and start to just sit down and think about everything that we're paying for.
Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. And it strikes me as sort of running in parallel to your desire to have enterprise programs and enterprise solutions. You want benefits that accrue at the enterprise level. And Rob, I'm just curious, I saw you nodding your head as Sarah was talking. What types of information or data do you use when you advocate for resources?
Yeah, I think Sarah probably put it in the most brilliant way that I can think of, and when I was listening to her, there's a lot of things that I think certainly apply for, my experience as well. It's one, recognizing, so like for my team, we have both enterprise resources, our risk travel platform, our emergency notification system, but then there's tools specific to my group, whether it's investigative tools that allow us to have situation awareness, et cetera. And as we're looking at, our kind of our charter, we always have to ask, like, okay, do the tools that we have under our belt allow us to be effective in this space? Are there things that we're recognizing in the threat space that we just can't see? And when I look at the GSOC, the thing that we can do that no one else can do in our organization is really look across the world, and domestically and across other partners, to understand what the threats are looking like and where they're showing up. And if we can't do that, particularly in relation to our assets or to our facilities, then we know for a fact that that's a gap. And some of the information I use on that is surveys with our staff, and there's tools that specific to the staff that the rest of the organization is not going to touch, because that's not what they do. So there's really not a sharpshooter in the audience like, oh, I don't believe you. But they will have questions if you miss a bunch of stuff, and if you're viewed as being ineffective. But then also taking a gauge for management. And even with some of the enterprise level tools, sometimes you just have to go out and see what other folks are saying about the capability you have. We recently, changed over a couple of our platforms because some of them were out of date and it just weren't effective to what we needed in a new environment. And as far as user adoption for the organization, and having that discussion. And then I think the last but not least is really, once you have an assessment of the things that you have and what's coming, really have a hard, honest discussions with your leadership, and understand that, though you would like your GSOC to do all the things, there are certain things that you need your GSOC to be effective at. And if there are a laundry list of things more that they want to bring on the table, then you have to have the honest conversation, looking at the resources, looking at the talent you have. I can't have an analyst become a mechanic. I can't, have an airline assistant becoming, an analyst, and we have to go to measure those expectations and then recognize specifically, in those spaces when we're looking for more resources, what is it that I need? Do I need more intelligence analysts? Do I need more security like generalists? And those are different piles of money. Those are different things. There's different asks, there's different requirements. But you really have to have those conversations on multiple levels to set the expectation and, really get a clear understanding of what's going on, because since things move so fast, oftentimes it can move faster than what the decision makers recognize, and they may or may not understand the utility of everything you have under your belt unless you're really level setting along the way.
I really appreciate that thorough explanation. And one of the words that popped into my mind as both of you were explaining was agility. You need to have a lot of agility when you're negotiating and even figuring out what programs you should implement or maybe pause. And so I do want to get into some audience questions. We've received a couple during the broadcast and before the broadcast as well. Here's one that came in a few moments ago. And they said, I think it touches on one of our topics earlier, organizations did a job of bringing together a multidisciplinary team, HR, legal, IT, security, et cetera, to deal with COVID-19. Have you or are you considering keeping this band together and focusing more broadly on operational resilience and ensuring you are delivering on your business objectives? Sarah, would you like to take the lead on that one?
I will. I will speak informally for my team, for the broader team at Gartner, and say, I can't imagine now not having it. We have just found this, synchronicity amongst ourselves. And if you find a silver lining with COVID, I've learned a ton about Gartner and what we do and how we do it, because I was new to Gartner when it started. And two, I have a far greater insight and far greater appreciation for what everyone else is asked to do in their career and how they support the business, which makes, for the security team, we are a service-driven function. We are here to serve, and it helps us serve better. So if anybody asks me what I think about keeping the band together, 100%. Because we are now a little bit past COVID in some ways, and we're having much broader conversations about who Gartner is in the new normal, and who you are in the current normal and who Gartner will be in the new normal, and this is really the right team to do that.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Sarah. And Rob, I'm wondering about within the NFL, how are you thinking about I don't want to call it the COVID band, but the folks that have been collaborating jointly to navigate these challenges?
I will say that the one thing that COVID did for a lot of organizations, it eliminated a lot of barriers to entry between different departments. I think pre-COVID, there might have been either precarious relationship, maybe very insular relationships between groups, or folks didn't really understand what everyone else brought to the table. So when issues came down, it was, oh, this is a security thing that we'll handle, or oh, that's an HR thing. And then, security gets brought in at the tail end once they realize it's a security issue. I think COVID really knocked down a bunch of walls and actually, showed the value to each of those different teams and how they play into solving that problem. I'm seeing it live now as we plan for our upcoming events, where in the past, it would probably, take a lot more effort to get to all the right folks in the room who are the true decision makers in those different lines of business. But they're willingly there. They're like, hey, this next thing is coming up. Let's talk through this. Here's what we did last time together. How do we go and improve the process? So I think on a teamwork side, particularly how dynamic the world is getting, or it's continued to be, I think it would be silly for corporations to not consider keeping that together. And if not, if anything, expanding that and strengthening those bonds and finding different other projects outside of world-ending events that they collaborate on and kind of grow together on.
Thank you, Rob. And just on that topic, as we think about upcoming events, before the broadcast, somebody asked the question in the audience, can you comment at all on leveraging technology while performing event security? And they mentioned specifically sports arenas and concerts. Do you have any comments on that, Rob, how you're using technology and maybe how you're approaching this season differently than previous seasons?
Thanks for teeing that one up. So I'll try to speak as broadly as possible on this. But I think in the COVID environment definitely introduced a ton of new technologies. Temperature screenings, the little scan things for food ordering, a lot of stuff that I think is going to continue to innovate and grow. I know, as we look at a lot of our events now, there's now a virtual component along with a physical component. And a lot of those technologies that get introduced, I think you have to, I think there's a lot of opportunities out there to really get rid of some of the old school things that weren't necessarily efficient when it comes to security of an event. But I would also say that you have to be very careful with that too, because sometimes you can over rely on those technologies to solve problems in which there's a practical solution, and it requires you to have a human element to that to ensure kind of compliance and efficiency. I think right now what we're working on is trying to find that comfortable balance. Because even after COVID, I think a lot of the health requirements aren't going away. And as we bring on new technologies and the world embraces new technologies, and we want to incorporate cooler experiences, like augmented reality experiences during a game and doing all these wonderful things. All of those require an element of security to it. And there has to be an element of security to those technologies you're bringing in to, support those events. I know from our standpoint, we're trying to find ways in which those technologies talk more together. So you're not looking all over the place if something happens. I think that's critical. And then really, I know from us, it's how do we have that dialogue and ability to talk to each other during a major event? How do we do it during Super Bowl and do it the same way for game days? And there's been a lot of really cool solutions that have really increased our ability to do information sharing. But then more importantly, any event that something does happen, it allows us to quickly triage and quickly get to that incident, handle it, and be able to move on and continue to support the rest of the event. I think that space is just going to continue to evolve. I think 2020 caused it to evolve in a pretty rapid fashion. And we're really excited about where a lot of the stuff is going. And just, I think for us is really just understanding how it fits into the ecosystem and how we properly leverage it. That's our true challenge right now.
Thank you, Rob. And just, I want to be respectful of both of your times. Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And so this is a topic I teased a little bit, but can you provide a recent example of it, like a clever solution or perhaps some type of workaround that somebody on your team figured out, maybe under pressure, maybe not under pressure, but just something that impressed you with its novelty or cleverness? And Sarah, could you address that one first, please?
Sure. So I will say one of the greatest things my predecessor did was hire a data analyst on our team. We have a very small team and we only have a few slots to fill. And, I would have argued for somebody else with a different skill set, and we brought in a data analyst. It was the best thing we've ever done. So this is somebody who we are lucky enough has a bit of a security and intel background that he could bring to the table. But what he really does for us is not just understand our technologies, but he understands lots of the technologies that Gartner uses across the board. And what we have him thinking through right now is how do we grab the data output from those technologies to really come up with what we're considering to be kind of an enterprise risk solution, which is tell me all about Gartner based on the data that our technology produces. So you can think on the security side, you're thinking about travel data. We're thinking about our badge swipe data. We're thinking about camera data. On the IT security side, we're thinking about all the data around potential intrusions or intel requests that they've gotten, intel requests that we've received. On the investigation side, working with the HR team around all of the types of investigations that they do. So it's really taking kind of that spreadsheet metrics collection that all of us started doing many years ago, and then spreading it out across the enterprise so that we are really kind of feeding into the crisis management and the business continuity programs that Gartner has with what we're learning about Gartner through the data that Gartner produces through all of our technologies. So I will say it's a success without it being done. But you know, we couldn't have done it without having a data analyst, and because it's really just somebody. In theory, anybody could have come up with the idea. In practice, it's much different. And in practice is really what you need that skill set for.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's just this notion, you mentioned spreadsheets and this notion of bringing data together in one place to be able to understand, all right, what's the overall risk picture look like? That would not have been the answer I might have expected. And Rob, I'm just wondering, do you have any recent examples of team members impressing you with coming up with creative solutions or maybe solving problems that were challenging?
Yeah, so one that comes to mind for us was, I think of in our first year, one of the asks for our team was like, how do we securely share information for our law enforcement partners during game day? And one of our charters was really reaching out, identifying the law enforcement entities that supported each of those game days on Sunday. And, you know, how do we have that dialogue in a place that was comfortable for them? But then also, how do we get information to our security directors who are actually out at times at games or events in a way that's easy for them to process as they're on the fly? So my senior analyst, you know, came over from DHS. They had used the HISN platform a lot, you know, and inside the HISN platform, there's a chat function. And you know, the HISN platform and the chat function is quite secure, and it allows for law enforcement partners or even private sector partners to be able to share information and discuss in real time as we're observing those games. And you know, that we built a process around that to have kind of weekly touch points with those partners. And now every Sunday for every game or every major event, you know, we have private sector partners who sit on there. We have law enforcement entities that support all of our different games, you know, at our 31 different stadiums who participate. They feel comfortable. There's never a question on what can be shared in that space. Additionally, for our security team internal to the league, we have Microsoft Teams already on house. So what we use is that to be the way we push information to our other security directors who are out supporting the games, particularly when there's major events that are going on, and they can only like quickly look at their phone and move on. You know, we found that it was very intuitive. And really, it was our senior analyst that drove that discussion, drove that kind of adoption. And now it's kind of expanding to other different cases in which for draft, for instance, we're doing a team sharing setup for our other corporate GSOCs that are working with us. So I think, you know, when I brought up earlier about the innovation of the team member, you know, they just utilize things that either from their experience, it was already free, and then, you know, applied that to things we already had on-prem. You know, and it cost us nothing to implement either of those, minus the time to get folks on board.
Thank you very much for sharing that example. And it's kind of resonates with me and relates back to Sarah's comment on the collaboration between private and public sector security people. And I think that's fantastic. Someone on your team was able to just apply that experience effortlessly and effectively. And that brings us to the end of the broadcast today. So I'd like to offer my deep, heartfelt thanks to Sarah Slinker from Gartner and also Rob Gummer from the NFL. And I'd like to thank everybody in the audience for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedules. Thanks for your thoughtful questions. On behalf of the panelists, we wish everybody good luck in whatever might the new normal be for your organization. And I would ask that the audience please take part in our exit survey. They will help us plan future broadcasts, and we'll have additional webinar topics planned for this year, and we hope you'll be able to join us. Thank you very much, and everyone have a great day. Goodbye.